Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. A lot to talk about in that we have one area that we really need to watch over the next several days. This Central American gyre that we have been looking at for the past 10 days or so, now taking effect and having impacts here with this system soon to be in best area 96L. Probably any hour now. At last check, it wasn't designated as such, but it's just a matter of time. National Hurricane Center giving it about even odds. Kind of weird to say that, but 50-50 chance over the next 2 days and 5 days respectively. I personally think that it'll be higher, especially over the next 5 days, and I'll show you my reasons why. If we look at the development area over the next several days, headed towards the general direction of the Sunshine State, Florida. And this could have some significant impacts depending on how things turn out. And I know that sounds like a very obvious statement, but I will explain that in a moment. I mean, this could go either way. It could end up being a non-event rainfall kind of thing, like, oh, okay, whew, we needed the rain, but luckily not much else happened. Or there are some indications that it could be a significant event. And remember, you don't have to have a hurricane for it to be significant. You know, we talk about that, or I do, often, and I hope we have learned that by now, that a 50, 60, 70 mile per hour tropical storm can have significant impacts, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. In the eastern Pacific, the remnants of what was TD-17 or potential tropical cyclone 17 or whatever it was have moved inland now over southeast Mexico. And as this dies away, it'll help this system in the southwest Gulf and the Bay of Campeche down here to become more focused and sort of take over. There's only so much energy available from this overall gyre of moisture and vorticity that's down here, that Central American gyre. You know, there's only so much to go around. And as this dies out, then the system in the southwest Gulf should take over. And this, don't worry about it, no big deal. Looking at the satellite imagery here, a few things to notice. Okay, this is the Gulf of Mexico. Here's Florida over here, coast of Texas, northern Mexico, Bay of Campeche, and the Yucatan Peninsula. Our area of interest is right here, and you can plainly see on the satellite animation the bubbling up of convection, very deep thunderstorm activity starting to percolate, and trying to consolidate, lower the air pressure, and develop a center of circulation, all that. That process is starting to take shape now. You also notice, as this is trying to develop here, there are very strong upper-level winds going from the west-southwest to the east-northeast across the northern Gulf of Mexico, anywhere from at least 25 degrees, is that 25 or 26? I think that's 26 degrees latitude. These are every 2 degrees, so that's 24. There's 26, and that's 28. All right. North of 26 latitude, very strong upper-level winds cutting across the northern Gulf. Now, if this were to just come up into this like that, let's say into central Louisiana, then the winds cutting across the Gulf would decapitate this system, removing the thunderstorm activity from any low-level circulation that manages to develop, inject dry air into it. All kinds of things would prevent it from stacking vertically, you know, becoming aligned in the atmosphere, and at the end of the day, it just wouldn't be very strong, pressure-wise, wind-wise, and the impacts would be very minimal. On the other hand, if this forms and then turns with the flow in some direction like this, we'll just draw a few scenarios in here, maybe even this far south, you never know, then it's moving with the upper level flow. And how many times have we seen that happen with systems, especially in October? Now, I don't want to read too much into the past. It's a good guidance, but it's not a real good indicator of the future. But you remember Nate, you know, just 2 years ago, that moved up into Mississippi, and it was moving generally with the flow, did have some upper level winds cutting across it. Nate managed to become a hurricane, And then last year, in the extreme case, Michael came up in here and made landfall, as you know, and found a very good pocket for itself to intensify with the flow. When days out, lots of people were talking about how sheared it would be lopsided. There were forecasts made from some private weather companies suggesting a non-event for the most part, a late season sheared, no big deal storm, and Michael was a Cat 5. Now, they all don't do that, thank goodness, and you already know that. They don't all do that. But the ones that do, we don't know until it's too late usually. And Michael did most of its intensification in the last 48 hours before landfall. The setup is entirely different. This is developing in the western Gulf. It's more than likely going to turn towards the northeast or east-northeast and be somewhere in this vicinity, central Gulf Coast, eastern northeast Gulf Coast, somewhere around there, Friday into Saturday. Exactly where remains to be seen, but the setup is enough that it's got my attention to the point where I'm thinking about seriously heading out tomorrow. You know, better to leave early than late, and everything's in motion for me to head down to the Gulf Coast, just put it that way. So when Mark is serious about it, you know, well, that must mean that something's going to happen. And that's what the guidance is leaning towards more and more, especially today's guidance. So looking at the vorticity signatures, a couple things to point out. First of all, with our system down here, this is the one in the Pacific. As this dies away, this will start to take over. This little piece of energy down here, just to the north of the Gulf of Tehuantepec in the Pacific, which is right there, and the Bay of Campeche, or Campeche, whichever way you want to pronounce it. And this will slowly drift off to the northwest and then finally turn the corner. And then it's a matter of where does it come in. Anywhere from, you know, the Cedar Key area, Apalachicola, Mobile, maybe even New Orleans, you know, Gulfport. I don't know yet. Nobody knows for sure. The guidance is spread, and I'll show you that in a moment. And so it's really hard to lock down where this is going to end up. So let's track this vorticity signature, see how that progresses. I will tweet this and talk about this often over the next several days, even as I'm traveling. And of course, I'll be able to post frequently on Patreon, actually the user interface there for creators, which is me. For the patrons, which are some of you, is very, very easy to use, very much like Twitter, Facebook, and WordPress for blogging, kind of wrapped up into one. Bottom line, I'll be able to keep you up to date on this, because this right here is what I follow very, very closely. The more defined this appears over time, then the better organized it is becoming. And I'm going to watch this literally every 6 to 12 hours and see how it shapes up. The other feature to watch is this energy here moving across the Great Lakes, and then this low pressure area that's going to develop and ride quickly up the coast and create quite the storm, an ocean storm up here, nor'easter, whatever you want to call it, mainly for New England and the Canadian Maritimes. Do not be surprised when you see tomorrow, well, look, it's already canceled. The playoff game up here, the Major League game that was scheduled for tonight in baseball, rescheduled for tomorrow now. This is going to have significant impacts up here in New England for what it's worth. Had this been later, let's say January or February, I would be on my way. I'd already be there, and we'd be setting up equipment, because this would be like the wintertime equivalent of a hurricane, but it's a nor'easter. It's a mid-latitude storm. Has no connection to the tropics, but it is a big impact system, and we can see it evolve here. I'll show you in just a moment. So first, let's focus on what's happening with soon-to-be 96L. Let's use the color blue. This is the area that we're going to watch right here. This is the GFS. This is the trough and the energy coming in over the mid-Atlantic that's going to spawn that low-pressure area that's going to ride up along the mid-Atlantic and into the northeast today. But right now, I want you to focus on this area right down here as we go through the frames here of the GFS, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits. This is the 850 millibar level of the atmosphere. And this shows us this. This is the analysis. This is the model. This is the forecast. And both of these show the vorticity and that organization that I was telling you about. And as you can see, it's rather loosely organized, but there is this curvature to the wind field down here. You can see these wind barbs. So there is an incipient seedling for something to develop from down there. So that's there. All right, we can establish that. So let's move through the frames. All right, this is the 6 hours out, so let's just move it up to 24. And right there, tomorrow morning, GFS indicating that it starts to consolidate, bundling that energy just east of the Mexican coastline in the western Gulf of Mexico. And the faster this comes together is, in my opinion, after years and years of tracking these things, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. The faster this organizes, especially this time of year, the better chance it has to become stronger and bring more significant impacts. Rainfall, wind, coastal inundation, flooding, storm surge, so forth and so on. But we will get to that. Right now, this is 24 hours out. We go out to 36, and it does start to bundle that energy. The weird thing is these little pieces that kind of break off. I don't know if this is, legitimate, or if this is the model not understanding the interaction with all of this energy that's scooting across the northern Gulf. It's hard to say. I don't think there's too many people that can tell you exactly what that means, but look what is happening. It has that S shape to it. See that? And that is a telltale sign, in my book, that it's trying to develop these bands around this common low pressure area, feeding into it and trying to intensify. Going on out to 48 hours, again, it starts to spread out. A piece of energy zips off very quickly up towards the southeast parts of Louisiana, while more energy is back here. In this scenario, the GFS is fairly broad. And if that's the case, this won't be a big wind maker overall in terms of intensity. It would be very difficult for it to become a hurricane. But if this is incorrect and it starts to bundle and it's not as spread out as this is indicating, in other words, if we look at the real-time analysis 48 hours from now, and we see this big ball of red, I got blue right now, but red sitting in here, and it's different than what we're seeing on the model, more bundled, then we can have a real big problem. So we'll have to wait and see how that evolves. That's 48 hours. Finally, at 72, it starts to come together between 54 and 72 hours. It does come together with a landfall somewhere in the Florida Panhandle, west or near maybe Panama City, whatever. That would be the center. But east of there, unfortunately, Mexico Beach, Port St. Joe, all the way over to the Big Bend would be impacted. All the way over to the peninsula, in fact, with strong onshore flow. This verbatim, taken as is, would be problematic enough, with strong onshore flow pushing into the Big Bend and impacting areas that Michael impacted last year. The only good thing from this is the rainfall. And you guys desperately need that down across this region, and this would seemingly bring that. That's the good side, and it'll be moving fairly quickly, so the prospect of extreme heavy rain seems to be minor. But what if this is more focused, as it makes landfall there? We'll just have to wait and see. This is still 3 days out, and that is a long time when we're talking about the structure of a system and how that relates to the intensity. Now, if we look at the European model for the same time frame, unfortunately, we don't get this but every 24 hours. This is the initial, and there's the energy down in the Bay of Campeche, southwest Gulf. If we move it out to 24 hours, the Euro shows it right there straddling the coast of Mexico, this time tomorrow roughly. 48 hours, it's trying to bundle that energy in the western Gulf. It doesn't look too menacing, admittedly kind of spread out. Then at 72 hours, it's slower. Remember, the GFS at 72 hours has this up over the Florida Panhandle in southeast Alabama, whereas the Euro Now it starts to try to focus this coming into southeast Louisiana. So there are differences between the models in the intensity, the structure, the timing, the track, etc. So this is another one of those dadgummit, pull your hair out, what do we do? And, you know, I made mention a lot of Florida over here, the peninsula. It is possible that we could see the model shift more towards the peninsula proper. That's not out of the question. So no easy answers. That's 72 hours finally at 96. It's well inland over Georgia as a big rainmaker for the southeast, which, again, is badly needed. Just to let you know, other models, I looked at the UK Met. Unfortunately, I don't have any graphics to show you, but the UK Met was fairly robust with its development of this system, and it has it more towards the Florida Panhandle, Central Panhandle area at about 988 millibars or so. Fairly intense overall. You know, it's a solid tropical storm. So the guidance is there. All the major models, the global models, are fairly, I would say they are unanimous that something is going to develop out of this and head off in the general direction of somewhere along the northeast Gulf Coast or central Gulf Coast. Sadly, nobody knows where it will end up and how strong it will be when it gets there. We're going to have to just wait and see. I wish I could add more, but I can't. That's just what we know. But you folks here, anywhere from Tampa, all through the Big Bend, all the way over to New Orleans, where I got an email today from one of my followers down there, great friend of HurricaneTrack over the years, lots of interaction with this guy, Michael Thibodeau, saying, you know, look, this rainfall and any interaction with wind, you know, that hard rock construction catastrophe that they're dealing with in New Orleans, you know, this could impact that, quite honestly. And he had a pretty strongly worded email about it. So we need this to kind of avoid New Orleans for obvious reasons. You know, keep it away from here. But let's get some rainfall up in this neck of the woods without the wind and surge. You know, can we do that? And there are festivals going on all around this area. It's just not the ideal time. We got football. When is it ever ideal to have a tropical system, right? But, you know, I sympathize with you. There's a lot going on this weekend, and we'd just rather do without. But we don't control that, and despite what people say on the internet, and so we'll just have to see what happens. I'll certainly be on top of it. And like I said, I'll be heading down from North Carolina to somewhere. I don't know yet. I have no clue where I will end up. We'll just have to watch it together. As I mentioned, there's other news happening in lower 48 weather, some wind advisories here in the Appalachians, coastal wind problems, storm warnings offshore. As this very potent low-pressure area takes shape, you can see on the national radar here, as we scooch this over to the east, lots and lots of rain where they need it, along portions of the east up the I-95 corridor and points inland, D.C., Baltimore, all the way up through Philly, and then spreading into the big cities of the Northeast up here. New England, going to be an incredibly windy night. You know, the howling wind coming through the trees with all the leaves on it could be interesting. You might see some power flashes. And this will all move into the greater Boston area, you know, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Not a good rush hour tomorrow morning for sure. And we can see this on the satellite picture here for the Northwest Atlantic. Here we have the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast Coast, etc. This is the upper level energy. Little surface low in here. This will die out as the surface low takes shape offshore and gradually moves up the coast. I say gradually. It'll do so rather quickly once it gets going. And like I said, it's kind of like you know, a dead hurricane going by or a dying hurricane. It's going to seem like it. Kind of, you know, not too cold because it's not January, but blustery, kind of mild out, ocean air spilling in from the east eventually. You're going to notice it, put it that way. And there could be some severe weather up there as well. So you folks in New England, be ready for this. Again, for the Gulf Coast, just to reiterate one more time, anywhere from Tampa, for real here, all the way up through the Big Bend, and yes, over to New Orleans, I don't know what's going to happen with this system. So you guys need to be on guard from this. The biggest threat to me would be if this makes landfall coming in from the east-northeast, something like that, where you could push a significant surge in that right front quadrant. A track a little bit more to the north across Apalachicola could do the same up in the Big Bend towards Cedar Key. So we're going to have to really watch this. I'm up here in Wilmington, North Carolina, and again, I don't know if I'm going to be heading out to I-95 and then down this way, or if I will make my way over to Atlanta and go down this way tomorrow. I just pretty sure that I'm leaving. That's about all I can tell you. And the rest, as they say, we'll have to, well, it's not quite history. I know that the saying is, the rest, as they say, is history. Well, this hasn't been written yet. We don't know. But I'll certainly be on top of it. So if you're on Patreon and you're one of our patrons already, I'll be continuing to take advantage of that platform, and I'll be posting regular updates there, as well as on Twitter, at HurricaneTrack on Twitter. And if, and I'm pretty sure of it, I'm 90% sure I'll be in a vehicle tomorrow afternoon. I've already got one reserved, a truck from Thrifty. So there you go. I will be streaming live every step of the way, and of course that will be publicly available from the vehicle camera on YouTube, and we can talk about things as I progress. All right? All right, that's all I know. That's all I've got for now. As always, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate your time and attention. We'll see what happens with this system. An interesting few days ahead for sure. So stay tuned. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll have more for you tomorrow morning.